let's get officially rolling. So again, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the MHTTC School Mental Health Best Practices Always and Now 8-part learning series. February through May. Whew, back in February, it felt like it was going to be a long journey, and here we are in May. We're already in the last session. So incredible. We're so grateful to all of you who have been with us throughout the whole series, all of you who have been with us through some of the series, and all of you who are joining us today. Wonderful. Today's session is session 8, Impact, and it is May 25th, 2021. Let's move forward. All right, so a couple of housekeeping things, and if this is old hat to you, you can use this time to stretch and get kind of settled in your own house of your body. Number one is that this session will be recorded and posted on our website, and Jessica and Livia are dropping those links in the chat box throughout the session. If at any point there's anything that does not seem like it should be happening, we are going to close and end the registration, and we'll let you know what's up. Your safety is priority, so that is how we're going to handle any interruptions that are not welcome and that do not create a safe learning space. A reminder that you are muted and you are off video, so you can be walking around during the session. You can be doing whatever you need to do in order to create a learning space for you. You can see us, and at this point, you should only be seeing me on video, and then when it's time for Elizabeth to come on, she'll come on. When it's time for Dr. Lafitte and Amber to come on, they will come on. If you do have questions for Amber and Dr. Lafitte and Elizabeth, please put them in the Q&A box. And I just want you to note that everyone will not be able to see the responses to the questions until they're answered, but we are watching them and we're looking at them and we're making sure that you're tracking. So if you're feeling like we're not responding to you, it's not because we're not, we're just curating them so that we can get your questions to the right place and to the right people. If you have an audio or tech issue, please private chat the name that says tech support. We made sure that the dropdown was easily accessible. And there is closed captioning available for accessibility, speaking of. So you can click on that live CC live transcript button at the very bottom, and you'll be able to get closed captioning. And right after this, you'll get an email on how to access certificate of attendance. We know that's really important to you and to all of us. So again, good morning. I'm going to invite Jessica to launch the poll so that we can find out who is in the room. So the first question is, did you view the pre-session video for Module 8? No shame in the game if you did not. It's just good information for Elizabeth, especially because she'll be covering she'll be covering that module, and so it's good for her to know. And then the second question is, what level of mastery or competence do you have with best practices for school mental health impact? So another way to think about that is when we think about understanding what it means to be a school mental health champion, what it means to run school mental health initiatives, what it means to run movements, where are you in your own self-reflection of how comfortable you feel understanding what impact might mean to you and those you serve? 1 being beginner, and 10 is like, move on out, Leora, I could be doing this. I would take over the webinar expert. Okay, and I'm going to trust Jessica when you are ready to close. When we are at time, we can close and publish so we can learn what kind of knowledge is in the room today. Let me know. Okay, gorgeous. So I'm going to verbally share out some of our results. So we're almost 50-50. So 57% of you did see the video and did watch the video on impact. Good information for Elizabeth. And 43% of you said you didn't. All good. So we're going to do a little bit of a balance, a little bit of a preview, and a little bit of a review. And we're a little bit all over the map when we are self-reflecting in where we are as understanding the power of impact. Some of us are complete beginner. Most of us are in the middle, 4, 5, 6s. And one of you considers yourself an expert. Hopefully that's someone on the panel. No, I'm just kidding. Hopefully the person and those of you who experience deep confidence, you'll offer your wisdom in the chat box as we move forward. And I just want to reflect that probably out of all of the modules in this guide, probably out of all the modules, this one is the most funky because impact is subjective, can mean a lot of things to everyone and not a lot of things to everyone at the same time. So the way that we understand impact is really important and reflects our values, our mission, our vision, and the way that we have been trained in coding and signaling impact. So that's part of what we'll be able to talk about today. All right, let's move on now, move forward. Okay, so again, welcome to our MHTTC network. We are in our middle of our third year of existence. We were launched in 2018, 10 regional centers, a National American Indian Alaska Native Center, and a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office, which has been incredible. I think if we can just give like massive snaps to the NCO, who's really been a backbone of this whole Always and Now series. And we are here for you across the country to develop and disseminate resources on workforce development, to provide local training, no-cost local training and technical assistance, which is like this. And we use the word technical assistance to mean training, facilitation, consultation, coaching, collaboration. And we are dedicated to really supporting those of you who support the mental health workforce. And as you know, there's also a school mental health workforce initiative as a part of the MHTTC network, and that's why we're all here today. Okay. This is the very tiny font map, but very important map because it will help you locate your local region. Again, I'm Leora and the School Mental Health Lead for that bottom left region, Region 9, here with my colleagues Angela and Oriana and Livia in the chat box. And we serve the Pacific Islands, Hawaii, California, Nevada, and Arizona. And you can find your own regional MHTTC across the country. I am just in constant humbled learning of our other MHTTC regions across the country. I imagine you are too. Please feel free to put a shout out in the chat box to any learning that you've gotten from your region, Central East, South Southwest, Northwest. And I just want to offer you that if you haven't been in touch with your region, there is a full open door access. So we will make sure to get you in relationship to your region. And we're so happy that you're here. Okay, welcome. Okay, so we are so grateful for the funding from SAMHSA at this time, and we just want to make sure that this presentation is reflected of the views and opinions of the presenters only. And so as the disclaimer mentions, that we'll be recording this presentation and posted on our website. We're inviting you to cite it if you're using the presentation or the content. And we also are grateful for the wisdom of our panelists and that they are their opinions and their experiences only. All right. Okay, almost through all the setups. If you have not, one more sentence. So today, this is how this morning will feel, or this afternoon will feel. We're going to have a 10-minute reorientation to the module on impact. And then I'm going to invite two panelists, one from Arizona, one from Michigan, to join us in sharing their own impact journey, impact leadership journeys. And then we'll have some Q&A. At the hour is when we invite you to move into your regional breakout sessions. I know we've been leading them for our Pacific Southwest, and they've been incredibly rich. So please, 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 please join them so that you can debrief and make meaning and have questions and resource each other, because that's really what this entire network is about. It's literally connecting your resourcing to your peers in your region. Okay, all that to say, welcome again to the almost 200 of us in the room for session 8, Impact. And this, again, is the session that wraps up our school mental health always and now journey. And the reason to remind us that the reason that we say always and now is because we know that these modules that are based on the quality indicators are always important, no matter if it was pre-2020 or post-2021, always, always, whether that was comprehensive school mental health, whether that was teaming, needs assessment, whether that was teaming, whether that was tier 1, tier 2, and 3, whether that was financing and sustainability. I'm kind of going through Oh my gosh, how can we forget screening? And now to this last module, module 8, impact. So always and now important. And we get to think about the now, the meaning, like, what does impact look like literally in this moment, in the context of the pandemic, in the context of the response or the recovery. And some of us also might feel the acuteness of the now of today, that it is an anniversary of a huge national awakening and shift that many of us are holding today. So I just wanted to note that we think about the always as what are the consistent principles of understanding impact, and now, what does this mean, especially for this moment? And Amber and Dr. Lafitte will be bringing that up later in our session today. Great. So if you are interested in the guidance modules, they are no cost. We're incredibly grateful for the National Center for School Mental Health and all of the partners that went into developing these modules the summer of July 2019. And you can click on that link that was just put in the chat, and you'll be able to access them, both the trainer manual and the participant manual. And I do want to encourage you that if you need support to think about how to roll out these modules, please contact your regional MHTTC network so that we can help you and be collaborators in your own design and implementation. Without further ado, so grateful to pass it to Dr. Elizabeth Connors, who will be walking us through this module. What is even in this module 8 of impact? And that will help us frame the conversation for when Dr. Lafitte and Amber join us later. So I'm going to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Connors onto video, and I'm going to go off video and hand it to you.
Thank you, Laura. I'm so grateful for it. I'm so grateful to be here with everybody and just to see so many kindred spirits who have signed on during such an incredibly busy year, particularly busy and stressful school year for those of you in schools, to talk about the impact of school mental health. As Laura mentioned, this is the final implementation guidance module in the National School Mental Health Best Practices series. So on the next slide, there's actually a list of all of the other modules there, and you'll see that here we are at module 8 impact. I saw that at least one participant in the chat says that they have attended all of these always and now sessions so far. So we're so excited to have many of you returning and making it all the way through to module 8, but please know that the recordings for these are posted. So if you missed any of them or you want to go back, please feel free to do so. Impact is really an exciting topic because it truly comes down to the why of everything we do, which is to make a difference in the lives of students, their families, and our school communities for the better. So we're going to take you through, as Liora said, a little preview and review. On the next slide, I'll just start with our very brief overview here on impact. The beginning of each module starts with an agenda slide, which you'll see next. And the module includes really a definition of impact and the value of documenting and sharing information about the impact of your local comprehensive school mental health system or systems. So I'm going to review those components briefly now, as well as the quality indicators and the best practices, and show you a couple resources along the way and tips that are included in this module that you can find here. So on the next slide, we're going to talk for a moment about what is meant by impact in this particular context. So in this module, impact really refers to the long-term effects or changes that occur as a result of the programs, practices, or policies implemented within a comprehensive school mental health system. This can take many forms and functions that are potentially relevant to you and your stakeholders locally, including educational, social, emotional, behavioral, physical health and well-being outcomes for students, could also be for staff members and our school personnel, as well as other measurable types of impacts, such as school climate, as we think about student connectedness, sense of safety, as well as cost savings and teacher retention. So impact can really take many forms and functions in the space of comprehensive school mental health. So on the next slide, I just want to touch briefly on why we want to document and report out on the impact of our work. So this brings value in so many ways to us. Documenting impact alone really allows districts and local schools to describe what's going well and areas for improvement. Information on the process and the outcomes of school mental health services can inform really needed adjustments to services or sometimes adjustments to our implementation supports in real time. And when we go beyond just documenting that impact to really reporting out, disseminating, and sharing what we know about our school mental health services and supports to stakeholders like families, schools, district leaders, state leaders, policymakers, and funders, there's an opportunity to show our value and also the cost effectiveness of a comprehensive school mental health system, right? There's a story here in the power of prevention, in the power of access and engagement that can really help us advocate for needed investments to support our school mental health services and systems. So on the next slide, this is a preview of all of the quality indicators for the impact domain. Quality indicators are metrics by which schools or districts can self-assess their performance in a particular area. And all of the modules include quality indicators as the framework of the module itself. So the impact module is a little different from the others because the quality indicators include actual numbers of students served. So specifically, this module really encourages teams to go after impact data that will help them document the number of students who are eligible for and received Tier 2 and 3 mental health services and support. So Tier 2 being those early intervention services and Tier 3 being indicated treatment intervention services. The indicators you see here really also push districts to think through how they could track the number of students with documented improvements in educational, social, emotional, and behavioral functioning as a result of the services and supports that they receive at school. This module also includes best practices in documenting impact, as well as figuring out how to disaggregate your student data based on subpopulation characteristics, and also the important work of reporting out and disseminating your findings to get the word out. So on the next slide, I really wanted to point out this particular resource, which is the School Mental Health Impact Quality Guide. It was developed by the National Center for School Mental Health. It covers best practices and practical tips from the field in school mental health impact, just like some of these that we're going to hear today. It also includes a number of customizable impact resources, some of which are also featured as resources right in this module and included in the participant guide. So this is probably your most comprehensive go-to resource for more detail on how to do everything actually contained in this module. So I highly recommend that you check it out. On the next slide, there's also a practical example from a district. This is something that's included throughout all of the modules. And it really is here to illustrate how to get this work done in reality, sort of when the rubber meets the road. This example illustrates how one rural small school district in Kansas was able to use their existing student information system, which happened to be PowerSchool, to start collecting more information on students receiving Tier 2 and 3 mental health services. They actually modeled what they did after how they were using PowerSchool to track student progress in Tier 2 and 3 academic services. So they really just expanded what they knew already from their great response to intervention practices on the academic side to the mental health side. So this example mentions PowerSchool, which some of you may be familiar with, but there are so many other different types of student information systems that you could use, and some of those are actually featured directly in the module. So just know that those examples are there for you if you're interested in learning more about other systems that you could access. So the next quality indicators really refer to best practices to document the impact of your school mental health system's effectiveness on educational outcomes. And these could be things like grades, attendance, chronic absence, office discipline referrals, performance test results. You get the idea, right? The next slide is actually a parallel indicator about social, emotional, and behavioral outcomes. So what you might have noticed for those 57% of you who checked out this module is the best practices actually are parallel here, whether you're looking at those educational outcomes of school mental health or kind of these social emotional behavioral outcomes. And so these best practices include things like developing a theory of change. So you have some sort of an idea of how your services might even be connected to these outcomes. Make sure you're identifying the existing or potential data that you could use, establish a data infrastructure, and most importantly, I'd really like to underscore the point of engaging students, parents, teachers, and other school staff to provide their feedback about the impact of school mental health. This can be in the form of testimonials, anonymous surveys, focus groups. So let's make sure that sort of the voices of the stakeholders in school mental health are a big part of how we understand and assess and communicate the impact of our work. On the next slide, it shows one of the helpful tips that I picked out for you all, which I think is great, and it just reminds us to make sure that we are selecting data that makes sense for you all locally. So teams are going to have to make some tough decisions about how they want to understand the impact of their school mental health systems. And that's going to vary a lot depending on kind of what your local context and service array and student population and stakeholders really are. So these local decisions are based on what types of outcomes are likely to be impacted by school mental health services, are readily available to you, are important because they're actually useful, they're actionable for your quality improvements or your leadership decisions, and they can actually be shared externally. So these are just some helpful tips to keep in mind when you're thinking through what data you might want to select and go after. The next slide shows a resource that I really love. It's actually another set of online modules, also SAMHSA funded, and this shows a piece of the module that really focuses on a continuum of program evaluation for comprehensive school mental health programs. And what I love about this is it reminds us that all districts come to this work of documenting impact or engaging in program evaluation from really different developmental phases. And we saw that, I think, in the distribution of the poll at the very beginning. People kind of rate themselves from beginner to advanced along that whole continuum, right? So some districts just starting this work, they're just starting to establish their systems, their processes, and their team to describe the services and supports they offer. Demonstrating long-term outcomes for students is usually a goal that most districts are really building toward for many years. And kind of start small and work up incrementally from there as they really develop the support and the engagement of their stakeholders and personnel implementing the work. So wherever you are starting from, and I hope that we can kind of keep this central in our panel discussion as well, wherever you're starting from is great because everyone has room to grow and a new stage that's kind of their growing edge for their district when it comes to documenting and reporting impact. The next slide features a best practice really around disaggregation of student mental health services and support data. This can really help your team understand to what extent there are differences in student access and/or student outcomes based on subpopulation characteristics of your student body that are very locally relevant to your community. So this can really help a team better understand whether outcomes differ based on gender identity, race, ethnicity, age, intensity of need, etc. Again, there's best practices here to really guide you through the steps. And the next slide features a neat resource that I encourage you to check out, which is a brief that provides a lot more information on how you can make a plan and work through this work of reducing disparities and disproportionalities by leveraging the power of your data and also stakeholder feedback. The last best practice in our quick parade here of the impact module is really, in my opinion, one of the most important. And this is about getting the word out about your school mental health system. How do you report on the impact of your comprehensive school mental health system to really be able to generate buy-in and support from diverse stakeholders, including policymakers and funders? So best practices for this indicator actually include a wide variety of different formats and methods that you can use to disseminate what you know and even what you're learning in real time, and get this information out to your stakeholders in a variety of ways. So really thinking about how we get that message out in a way that will reach kind of the hearts and ears and minds of folks that we want to know about the value of our work. And there's actually a number of resources in the module that you can use as templates for this if it's something that you're still really growing, your ability to kind of get the word out. The next slide shows a resource that is just an example template about how to report out your impact to external stakeholders. You can see that it has kind of an infographic style. You've got a visual emphasis on the large font numbers and relevant images with really brief segments of text to explain each finding. So there's a lot of templates and examples contained in the module that you can check out if this is something that you're really working toward locally. So in summary, on the next slide, I just have a few key takeaways here to just kind of punctuate what I think are some of the main messages across all of these best practices and resources. The first one is go after data that are really relevant to your stakeholders, and figuring out what that is going to be kind of a local decision for you all. And then also make sure that you're going after data that are actionable in real time. So if you don't know what you would do with the information, it's probably not the right kind of information to seek. You also want to share what you're learning. Make sure that you're not just collecting it and holding on to it internally or for a small group of stakeholders, but you're generating engagement and support and advocating for change. So with that, I'll hand it back to Leora so we can get to the panel portion.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, thank you. Really good questions that are also coming up in the Q&A. So Dr. Connors, I really encourage you to check out the Q&A if you can help some of us out. I think the beautiful part of what you mentioned and what I heard, and I'm going to use this as a time to welcome Dr. Lafitte and Amber on video, is an invitation for all of us to know that we are always learners. We are lifelong learners in this experience to think about, conceive, experience how we talk about and feel and celebrate and measure impact, and that ultimately this is actually the module that brings it all home. And some of the questions are coming up in the chat box that tie the previous modules together. So thank you. I cannot say enough about how excited I am to be in conversation with Amber and Dr. Lafitte. I'm not going to read through their bios because you'll have it in their deck, but I do want to first of all say welcome, Amber and Dr. Lafitte. A couple things, and then I'm going to invite you to share what you are most celebratory about in your work right now as an introduction of who you are. And before, so I'm priming you. Before, as they're kind of marinating in that prep question, I want to say that the reason that we invited these two school mental health champions, one in Michigan and one in Arizona, into conversation today is because both of them have really held the balance of local school mental health championship down from school site to school district to interconnected school districts to networks, and then working in initiatives. So connected to Project Aware, Advancing Wellness and Resilience in Education, which builds off of Safe Schools and Healthy Students, one of the resources that Elizabeth referenced earlier. So what we'll hear are two school leaders who have, one who has led through 5 years of Project Aware and is now thinking about what happens afterwards, one who is in the middle of it, and also all the other intersecting initiatives and movements, that influence their leadership. So we're going to go alphabetically. So we'll go Amber and then Dr. Lafitte. Who you are and one piece that you are really proud of in your school mental health championship in this moment.
Well, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you again for having me here, Leora. My name is Amber Fox. I work for Kent School Services Network, which is a school. We do provide the community school model or the community school strategy in our county and Grand Rapids, Michigan really is where we're at. We serve the whole county, but that's kind of what we're the second largest city in the state of Michigan. And as Leora mentioned, I was part of our Project Aware work, which was our ISD, which is our county-based work, was one of 3 Project Aware locations across our state. So we worked within our own county and supporting our 20 districts and trying to get them on board with Project Aware, and then also worked with those other 2 ISDs to try to push things at the state level. And I guess your question about what are we celebrating right now, or what am I celebrating, I think is just looking back and seeing where we've been and where we are today, and the fact that we are seeing so much funding come in at the state level to our local districts, and then how we're using that at our county level to continue this work that we started through Project Aware, which has really been all around this idea of impact and how do we build a system that moves away from individual, sort of that whack-a-mole approach to, of getting individuals into services, to how do we build a system that changes the cultures in buildings and really works at that tier 1 level first. And so we're seeing that happen at the state level. It's coming down to our local school districts as well, but we're starting to use the same language and starting to realize that we don't need to work in silos, we need to work together. So a lot to celebrate right now.
Ooh, okay, so in sum, before Dr. Lafitte, we're seeing a shift. We understand that our championship, our impact over all these years is now kind of actualizing in funding that acknowledges and affirms the need for comprehensive school mental health. We're seeing multiple people on board, multiple systems on board. So it's not just that one champion. It's not just that one person who's like, come to my club, please, school mental health matters, but it's actually a shared culture, and that it's part of the body, the fascia of your community. Thank you. Let's hear from Dr. Lafitte, who you are and what are you celebrating in this moment?
So I'm Louis Lafitte. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Behavioral Health and School Safety in Glendale Elementary School District. We're a K-8 school district in Glendale, Arizona, which is in the Phoenix metro area, just north of Phoenix. And for me, what we're celebrating is just that as a district, the work is being embraced, and that people are engaging, people are trying to say, how do we work as a connected unit to help support our students and families. So I'll try to keep it brief there.
Okay, well, we're probably going to want to hear about how you got to that connected unit in a second. All right, I'm going to invite our team to take down the screen so that we can center the voices of our panelists. The first question that we wanted to center is, I'm so grateful for Linda's question in the chat box, or the noticing that this module impact should be module number 1, right? Because it's about the why. And it is, because it's circuitous, it's cyclical. Part of our module 1 is defining what comprehensive school mental health means to us, which is essentially about our theory of change. And I think that one of the biggest elements in any championship and any theory of change are the adults in the system. So we can look at student data, and I'm curious, knowing both of you, if you might share how do we understand adult belief system as indicators of impact? And if you could maybe share a story of how you kind of sensed when there was a palpable shift in the communities that you led, and maybe some hypotheses of what got you there. And again, we'll start with Amber and then go to Dr. Lafitte.
Sure. I think, our work was so much around building this system. And for us, it's this interconnected systems framework. And it was, at first we started bringing in a bunch of community partners who are all servicing schools in different ways, trying to meet this need. And at some point we realized that as a group, as a leadership team, we needed to be on the same page, and we were still working very much in silos, which is what we were trying to get the schools to avoid. We were trying to move them towards a comprehensive system. So once we started hearing, each other start to say, wait, this is the system. We have to do this at our level as well. That started to change everything. Our silos started to break down, and we started to see that change then in the districts as well as we were supporting them. The other example that I have, and a lot of it's the language. And so as we're hiring new staff now, as we're building a new position, we're all using the same language, even though it's departmental, across departments, we're saying we got to be continuing to work on this ISF, this interconnected systems framework, and how can this equity position support it, and how can this special ed position support it, and general ed, and across the different departments. Another quick example are some of the schools we're working with as they're moving into wanting to do more trauma-informed schools. And we're starting to see that same movement from individualized, these are the students with trauma, to how do we change the whole school culture to be one that really supports the needs of all students. And we're using that interconnected systems framework in every training we're doing, whether it's trauma-informed or social emotional learning or equity-based work. And so we're starting to see, again, that language shift then at the local level as well, and kind of get out of our silos.
So for me, my background is pretty wide. And so because of that, I've had some experiences that when I came into this new role, I came in with that idea and that mindset of how do we bring everyone together. So I have a special ed piece now background. I've always seen how special ed was excluded. And so when I came into this role, it was how do we include everyone in this, and how do we make everyone a part of this, and how do we begin to shift the mindset, taking that special ed approach, because sometimes teachers would see special ed students as, well, that's your student, not my student. But how do we look at it as they're our students? So how do we take that approach to the entire system? And so how do we look at every student? So to take your term there, Amber, to look at that equity piece and see how all students, regardless of whatever their difference is, how do we say this is the system that we need to build to support all students? And what is the data we need to begin to look at? So for me, when I came here, our first thing was we worked on mindset, and it was with adults. So the first major PD I did was mindsets, and we talked about ACEs as well, because we wanted the adults to begin to understand that some of the things that they've experienced within their lives, they've shaped who they are, and those same things our students are experiencing. And how do we begin to take the students' experiences, recognize those, validate what they've experienced, and say, now how do we use that experience to support where we're going as an organization? For me, that's kind of the approach I took for it, to build that connectedness there.
Yeah, first of all, I'm so grateful for you mentioning and centering special ed, because there's so much that we can learn as school mental health champions from special ed champions that are often siloed, disenfranchised, not seen as central, but and so I really appreciate that inclusion. And I'm curious if the two of you might share also, aside from the way in which you centered adult mindset as an integral piece in your theory of change to school mental health impact, what are other ways, soft ways, sharp ways, that you have noticed an initiative actually impacting student mental health, or a program or an approach actually supporting those who support students' mental health comprehensively? And of course, we can center the types of services. And I know, Dr. Lafitte, you have lots of years in thinking about how we even think about what services and programs are in tiers and how that reflects those changes. So wanted to open it. And of course, I want to offer anyone listening to offer your own noticings, signals of change and impact in your championship in the chat. So maybe Dr. Lafitte, we can start with you and then go to Amber.
So we're fortunate in my department, we've added some roles to try to support those pieces. And so I know funding becomes a question that always comes up for people, but to help support that, to center that, to open that up, we actually have an MTSS principal coach and in my department. And what her responsibility is to work with leaders to guide them through these conversations that we're having now, figure out where our strengths are, where our challenges lie, and how to support that. So it's building that there at that level, and she does a phenomenal job with the principal she's assigned to. We walk in the approach of we're just establishing culture, but really it's bigger. It's more to it than that piece. But I think that's been one way we've been able to support. That's one way we've been able to kind of dive into it. to say this is how we can help make those changes and ground and center us moving forward, because we have to get people to recognize where they are in the process. And really from the leadership perspective, it's if I do it as the principal, then I model it, support my staff with that, then it tends to kind of rub off on everyone, for lack of a better term. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's been interesting this past year with the pandemic and how some of these systems that the foundation we were laying and trying to build in some of our project aware districts, how they were able to really pick up on the student needs during the pandemic in a more systematic kind of way. And so I look at some of the districts that, sent surveys directly to students about how are you? Are you feeling alone? What are your needs right now? And in some districts, there was a fear of, if we put this out there, we might not have enough resources to meet these needs. But because we built this system with community partnerships, with the school-based staff, we were able to support those districts and being able to meet all of those needs. And so in a way, youth voice was elevated at a time when kind of the crisis created that youth voice to be elevated. And now there's more data to be able to say, okay, what are we going to do this next year with this as far as additional programming and resources that are needed? And I think it's just started to shift that mindset a little bit about the importance of youth voice and going directly to them, that they do have answers for what they're looking for. So I hope to see more of that continue. And I think the other area has really been about educator wellness. And it's something we had talked about so much during Project Aware, but we just didn't quite get to it. And then this year with the pandemic, it kind of pushed that a little bit more. And we have some pilots going on now where we're supporting educators with coaching, with different resources for educators throughout the pandemic to meet their own wellness so that they can support students better.
Okay, so you went to one of our questions centrally, because this is the Always and Now series. So let's do a little bit even more deep dive into how has this pandemic, how has COVID both expanded the way that we understand impact, and also maybe pushed or put pressure points on how we understand impact. And let's just open it. Like, what has this been like in this moment to understand impact for you as a leader?
So for me, it's actually been great, because we were able to use it as that impetus to say, hey, because of this, because we know what some of our needs are, we just need to do it. Let's just jump in and do it. And staff was more accepting and willing to embrace. Families were more accepting and willing to embrace. Students were more accepting and willing to embrace, just simply because our world has shifted. And I know we have these unknowns and we have these instabilities with what COVID brought and took away, but the school I trust and the school leadership has this belief system that these things will support and help us. And so whether it's implementing X amount of minutes per day of cell instruction, whether it's specific PDs for staff, whether it's certain things that we did with parents. We had some parent groups we did virtually. We had some student groups we did virtually. So a lot of different things we were able to just jump in. And so we really didn't have that vice to say, no, I'm not willing to do it. Everyone was really ready to jump in and say, let's make this happen, because we want what's best for our students, our school community, the community as a whole.
Yeah, I would say, in addition to what I already mentioned about really reaching the students directly, I think our work as foundational systems kind of work came to a halt last year because of COVID, right? Everyone's on the ground in the trenches, but that allowed us to learn more too. I think both hear again from the students, hear from the families. We did a lot of surveys directly out to families, and not surveys as in collecting information to figure out what to do later, but what are your needs right now in real time? And that gives us information moving forward too, right? But I also think it created a sense of urgency So I think we've been laying the groundwork for a while. Mental health is important. There's this need, and we identified or discovered quite a bit of that through Project Aware, but this last year I think elevated it even more. And so now we're flooded with needs requests for PD, for additional supports. And so it's a good thing. And I think now the funding's coming in to support it too. So at that kind of, district support level, it's there to support more schools, individual buildings and districts.
Yeah. So let's move into a complicated question, and then we'll move to our question and answer. So please include them in Q&A. All right, so I just want to be direct. I think the concept of having us as school leaders constantly measure and have to prove ourselves in impact can really be difficult. As leaders, as individual leaders, to prove ourselves, to tie our sense of worth to external evaluation or internal evaluation, to have to potentially tell our story in measurements that might be from external versus the way that we would potentially define impact. And so I just want to talk about what are some of the personal leadership challenges that both of you have grappled with in understanding the power of your impact as school mental health champions.
You want to take that first, Amber?
Sure, I'll be a little vulnerable because I think that's part of it, is just been, stepping into the vulnerability around this. Celebrating the wins, I think, is really big because it's so easy to get caught up in perfectionism and some of these other tools of a white supremacist culture, right? And so to say it's not enough, or it's not going to be valued by, these different people, but celebrating those small wins when they happen. And so taking a step back and looking at, wow, this is where we were pre-Project Aware, and look at where we are today. Look at how many districts are partnering with our ISD for MTSS so that framework, the foundation of our framework can be there. Look at the number of schools that want to hire their own school-based mental health providers and work with community partners, because we see the need to work together. So celebrating those small wins along the way and not striving for perfection.
Raj.
I would agree. I would agree with that. It's when I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Well, I'll just stick with how Amber led this. I think those small wins are good. I think acknowledging where we've had those successes during these times. But I do think part of it is just consistently, for me, it's still consistently working on building those relationships with folks so that there's a trust and a belief that everything I'm guiding them with is the right thing, so that as they do things and they communicate with me, and I can kind of coach them, guide them, give them acknowledgement, praise for some of what they've done. I think those have been some great pieces. We have one school that, and we've been in and out of school, so we had to kind of look at the data as a whole. And so when we looked at just during this time frame of the year, when we looked at discipline data as one measure, we saw that one school went from leading the district to now they're the lowest, because they've truly embraced a lot of these components on empathy, understanding, care, compassion. I'm big on the term compassion, because sometimes empathy is hard for people to say how in your shoes, but sometimes it's easier to know that's just wrong what's happening, or that's right what's happening. And so having that level of compassion, and I think that support in that particular case, that principle, and to give that acknowledgement that, hey, I see what you've done a great job. And I think those things help us grow as an organization and as individuals.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you're raising this, because I think that for many of us, when we talk about wellness and compassion fatigue and our own burnout, that oftentimes, I'm going to speak for myself, it comes from a place of really earnestly wanting to do right for whom we serve, and constantly navigating inputs that are sometimes in our control and sometimes out of our control. And so I am hearing from both of you when Elizabeth mentioned that part of this module invites us to think about our collective theory of change. For us as individuals, incredibly, and I'm gonna just pause and ask if all panelists who are not speaking can mute themselves, that would be helpful. So that sentence one more time, that Elizabeth named that theory of change was essential as a collective. And what I'm hearing from both of you is for our own personal theories of change to also be really grounded, because that's a practice for us in our own why, that I might be writing a report to a funder that might have some numbers, but I also might have an experience with a student or a staff member that had a small moment of shift where it was led with compassion and led with humanization that may never get reflected or seen by the external, right? And that's so vulnerable, so vulnerable. Okay. So last question, and then I think we'll have time to open it again, which is another tricky one. How do we know as school leaders when we are disrupting harm in our systems? What are ways? I know, Dr. Lafitte, you just talked about discipline data, but I'm actually wondering if we can get back to the ways that adults in the system interact, collaborate, belief system, back to our original question, because ultimately impact is not only about positive, it can also be about interrupting the harm. So I'm curious of what are the ways in which we can understand how harm is being disrupted or interrupted in our championship?
You know, for me, it's been truly qualitative. It's as I hear stories, as I see instances and occurrences, where you'll have a staff member who, when something happens, they say, I didn't know that. I didn't know that story. I didn't know this or that about that child. And it made them look at things in an entirely different way. When they look at with that child's, whether it's their home environment, whether it's something they've been carrying. And I've had the same thing with adults as well, where some things they've been carrying were triggered by something that happened with the child. And it created that moment, but it was the conversation at that point. And I know that's tough for people to say, I don't have the time, especially in the classroom, right? If you have 30 kids, I don't have the time to stop and wait and listen and do this and do that. But I think it's time well spent when you invest it in people, when you invest it in understanding, when you invest it in knowing people's story, because then you can help. It kind of answers the question there, Leora, that how do you begin to know that? Because oftentimes those are those hidden gems. You know, it exists, but we don't know. And so we have to be willing to ask questions. And if you ask someone, how are you doing? You have to mean it. And you have to be willing to sit there, you know, even as simple as our own personal relationships. You know, I have to ask my wife sometimes how she's doing, and I have to mean it, right? I have to be willing to wait for her to tell me exactly what happened. And I can't stop the story. I have to absorb it, listen to it, gain understanding, and build context and say, I get it, I understand. So.
Thank you. Yes, Amber.
Yeah, kind of building on that, I think it's about slowing down. I think when we slow down individually and collectively, we do less harm. It's really hard to hurt somebody when you're going really slow. I mean, just think about it as you're driving or doing other things. So when we slow down, we can make better decisions and cause less harm and be more intentional about who else needs to be here to be part of this conversation, whose voice is missing. And then also, I think it ultimately comes down to, I see in the chat some conversation about self-care. I'm shifting my way I look at it is self-love now. And the more work we do ourselves on self-love, the more we recognize I think the importance to slow down for ourselves, and we can show up more fully for each other, whether it's, you know, individually with a student or in a meeting with a bunch of people trying to figure out systems. We just show up better and we ask better questions, and really we are able to listen more and come up with better solutions that are centered in compassion and love.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm noting that we're coming to the end of our hour and we're about to move into regional breakouts. And I just want to offer that some of the questions for us, all of us, to sit with in our own leadership and our school mental health championship is what is our own way that we understand, that we signal, that we receive impact? And what are we willing to sit with ever not knowing, right? What are we willing to sit with ever not knowing? And what are the small ways that might signal culture shift? You know, I'm remembering a time when I was leading a professional development and I had a teacher say, wow, I never knew that my student was homeless. If I had only known, I wouldn't have treated them that way. And so the vision for all of us is to get to a place where you would never have to know what someone is holding on to in order to treat them that way. As Dr. Lafitte, you mentioned, with compassion, as Amber, you mentioned, with full support, with full trust. Or another district that we worked with through Project Aware that shifted from starting to say, there's no such thing now as non-cognitive anything. Everything is cognitive, everything is social emotional, everything is cognitive, no more non-cognitive. So I'm hearing both of you lift up the small, the leadership inquiry, the systems vision as a whole. So from the movement from the I to the we, but also noting the work that we have to do on ourselves and with ourselves to continue to guide through this work.